Okay, I think perhaps we should get started, and I'm assuming people will trickle in as we get going. So yeah, first off, thank you everyone for joining us today. We have some new participants, and so if you could just introduce yourself in the chat, that'd be fantastic. My name is Jillian. I am Senior Program Officer with Climate Group. But today we are fortunate enough to have Ariana and Tom from Center for Climate Strategies to kind of be going over all of the opportunities for accessing federal funding regarding energy supply funding opportunities. So yeah, I'll pass it over to them.
Maybe Tom, I'll get started if you want, and then yeah, I pass on. So hi everyone. As Gillian mentioned, Tom, myself, and actually Nick and Holly, they are also on the call. We are with the Center for Climate Strategies. We will go through a bit, sorry, we will go through an overview of the project quickly, just because, as Gillian mentioned, there are a few people that have not been with us. And then we will focus on the federal funding opportunity from the Infrastructure Investment Job Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, specifically for the energy supply sector. We have a few questions for, just to help a bit incentivize discussion throughout the presentation. And also, of course, as time for final questions at the end. But please, this is a very open and informal discussion, so feel free to ask questions in the chat, or just intervene during the presentation. We very much would like to hear from you and what you are looking for, so we also can tailor a bit the presentation as we go. One other maybe note since the beginning, this briefing will be followed by a short summary memo where we will basically provide additional the same information we are presenting today, plus some more details. So you will be able to review again what we are presenting now in an actual memo that will be shared in a couple of days. And Gillian, of course, will share the recording of this presentation. So you will have also the opportunity to share this with other of your colleagues that were not able to join us today. Gillian, can you move to the next one, please? So a bit about the project, again, for the ones that are new, and we are very happy to have you on the call. We started this project related to accessing federal funding opportunities for both states and localities a few months ago, was around May, June. Is a project conducted by the Green Recovery Alliance. That's a partnership between the Center for Climate Strategy and the Climate Group that serve as Secretariat of the Under2 Coalition. This project is funded by private foundation and New York Community Trust. So we have started the project, as I mentioned, back in May of this year, and we completed the project in April. And so we are really in the middle of all of these and looking forward to working with different states and localities as we go. Next one, please. So what we are trying to do with this project is to provide in-kind assistance to, as I mentioned, state and local governments in deployment of federal funding. So we will do this by engaging through a series of briefings. Maybe, Gillian, can you go to the next one? Might be easier. Next one, please. There should be one. Okay, so maybe let's stop here. We will engage through a series of briefings like the one that we are doing today. We did already two briefings, one on the overall overview of the Infrastructure Investment Job Act and Inflation Reduction Act, and the other one focused on the transportation sector. We are doing this briefing today on the energy supply sector, and we will do another one on the buildings sector in early December. So the first way to participate in the project is to be part of this briefing. Next, what we are also doing is to identify here you go. We have to identify at least 5, let's say, or maybe maximum 5 of states and localities that can work with us on some specific programs. So what the states or the localities that express interest will basically ask to identify 1 or 2 priority programs. They are mostly interesting across these sectors, and we will help them in identify federal funding opportunity and then track this federal funding opportunity and understand the key requirements to apply for those. Because of the timeline of the project and resources as well, we won't be able to assist the government, the states or the localities in apply for the actual funding. Again, just because of timeline, as you know, especially for the Inflation Reduction Act, we are still waiting for a lot of guidance. But what we hope to do with this project, help you identify where you can, which fundings makes more sense based on your priority programs, and then in a way get you ready to apply when the time comes. The project basically aims to fill a gap that we have realized that exists, a capacity gap. We know that many of you definitely have all the skills and the knowledge to do this work, but it's more an issue of limited time and limited resources. So we are hoping to support that. So we are right now in the process, so as I mentioned, to holding this briefing, but at the same time identify the jurisdiction. We have already identified a few, and maybe towards the end we can go back to how you can participate and what we would like from you next. Next one. Okay, so maybe before getting started on the energy supply sector federal funding opportunities, again, we will go through some of these opportunities, some of these programs. There are many, so this briefing is really not meant to review each of those programs in detail, but give you an overview. But I think one thing we would like to hear from you, especially maybe from like new participants, is about the biggest challenge that you are currently facing in acquiring federal funding for the energy supply sectors. So, and we are thinking, for example, about transmission, grid upgrades, and this kind of activities. And Tom, Nick, Holly, feel free to jump here at any time. So again, we would like to start with the question, just a bit to break the ice and start to hear from you so that we can tailor a bit the discussion as we go. Any volunteer that would like to share where you are, which are the biggest challenges you are facing? Or maybe anyone that was already with us during during the previous briefings for the other sector. Julia, go ahead.
Hi, I think my biggest challenge is, I'm from Prince William County, Virginia. Biggest challenge is staffing constraints and just having the resources and identifying the funding sources and pulling together, things like grant applications.
Yeah, well, and it's not a surprise, I would say. It's just there are so many out there, and understanding which one makes more sense and understanding the deadlines and the requirements, it's quite challenging.
Yep.
Perhaps not to call anyone out, but perhaps it'd be interesting from Takeshi, because I know California is a unique situation in terms of accessing federal funding because they're so large, and so it'd be great to hear from him.
Hi, everyone. Happy to jump in. I have to say, I'm not sure how much value this comment will have, since I'm both fairly new to Cal EPA and also California, I believe, is fairly experienced in accessing federal funding. So I'm mostly interested in hearing about others' challenges. So I'm sorry if that's not very helpful.
I mean, it's really nice to have you on the call, I have to say, because so as we hear about other the challenges that others are facing, would be also nice, since you are definitely state very much advanced, if you can provide any recommendations, suggestions in how to face those, that would be also very helpful, based on, based on your experience.
Again, I'm not sure how useful this will be, but part of the reason California has had so much success in accessing federal funding is due to its size and not facing the same staffing constraints that local governments face.
Yeah.
But that said, I think it's worthwhile reflecting and stressing on the importance of the relationship between state and local governments and the role of the state government in enabling local, municipal, city, and county governments and helping them in their applications.
Yeah, and if at some point you would like to share a bit more around that, I think that's definitely something of interest, especially for the locality, the local government, and how you go about the coordination between states and local governments. We do understand that's key, and especially for some applications and some programs, it's a kind of key requirements. It gives also a sort of priority in accessing those federal funding. So if you feel, at any time during the briefing, if you feel like you would like to share around that, feel free to jump in.
Thanks. Yes, I'll be sure to do so where I feel I have something of value to contribute.
So anyone else, or we should keep going? Okay, so maybe let's move on to the next. Okay, here we go. Another question. So within the energy supply, so again, the focus today it's on energy supply. We did already briefing on transportation last month. We will do another one on buildings next month. So today we're focused on energy supply, and also the other thing that would be helpful is to know if there is any specific priority program you have in your jurisdiction that you are working on, for which you are trying to identify the federal funding opportunities that could support that. Anyone would like to share where you are right now in the energy supply sector? Which priority programs are you focusing on?
Yeah, I can speak up for the city of Naperville. My name is Ben, city of Naperville, outside of Chicago, Illinois, and brand new to the group, and so I appreciate you having me and hosting the call. A lot of the things we're focusing on, we own our own electric utility, and we focus a lot on trying to connect our constituents, businesses, citizens to energy efficiency, as well as we've got a solid commitment to installed solar energy here in Naperville. And one of the things we're trying to identify funding for right now is to build out battery energy storage technology to pair with our solar installations. And then beyond that, we purchase power from a group called IMEA, and we have a lot of constituents and stakeholders who would like for us to figure out a way to move away from that primary coal-generated power that we purchase from them. So another issue in our region is identifying how can we build out enough capacity with non-fossil fuel generated electricity.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of that goes within planning, right? And understanding where you are, which is your potential. Tom, anything you would like to add?
Well, I think we will be maybe in a minute here stepping through some of the specific programs, both on the Infrastructure Act side and then the Inflation Reduction Act side. And it would be great to pick this up as we go to understand which of those programs might be applicable, storage and increased renewable energy generation, and what level of need folks have in terms of pursuing those programs further. But there are certainly programs that are available and eligible. The procedure for going through the access is something that would be maybe focusing a little bit as we go through.
Anyone else? Okay, so maybe Jillian, do you mind to move to the next one? Okay, so I guess we get started on the actual presentation today. So as I mentioned earlier, we will focus on the Infrastructure Investment Job Act first, and then we will move to the Inflation Reduction Act. You will see we will go through some generic requirements around these programs, and then we have a list, first a table format, and then details around each of the programs related to the energy supply. We don't mean work through all the details of this program during this briefing, but they will give you enough sense of what is out there, and then we can follow up based on needs. Next one. Tom, you want to start from here?
Sure. And I think probably most folks are familiar with this, but we'll do a little bit of an overview here of the structure of the programs, and then pick up some specifics. So within the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the acronym there is EJA, but it's also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or we'll try to refer to this as the either the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or just the Infrastructure Law to try to keep it simple. But in it, we see two basic sources of funds: the formula-based funds, and then grant programs. Formula-based funds for further distribution. Competitive grant programs are open. Their eligibility is spelled out for each one of those. We have resource documents that we've obtained from the federal agencies that catalog all of these, but each of them is in terms of the intended eligible end uses and recipients, and we can talk a little bit more about that as we get into them. Go ahead. As Ariana mentioned, there are some cross-cutting considerations in both the Infrastructure Law and Reduction Act. Workforce development is a dominant theme, be a part of the compliance in most cases. The Justice 40, we call this J40 requirement, applies to virtually all, if not all, of the infrastructure programs, and on which how are Justice 40 requirements and then related requirements in the Action Act. As you, I'm sure, know, the particular definition is disadvantaged communities, has many sub-definitions and metrics, and it will get to the issue of determinations about eligibility of the existence of definable disadvantaged communities in a particular project area. And this includes urban or concentrated communities, as well as rural or dispersed populations with what are known as common traits. And so this is just an across-the-board requirement. You will see also part of the sub-definition in the Infrastructure Law, and then this gets picked up in the Inflation Reduction Act, of attention to low and moderate income households and the coverage holds. So we'll talk a little bit more about it. And I know it's a very big issue for everybody, how you will do that, and a little bit of variation there. Maybe we'll circle back to that. Also in the Infrastructure Law, matching funds are typically required. In some cases, they've been waived. Some of these are existing funds that have been plus volume levels but maintained past matching fund requirements. In other cases, they've actually modified the matching funds as a part of the new infrastructure law, but matching funds really important part of the preparation of applications for the grants. Are many deadlines. We're going to show you here a little bit, which are the deadlines that federal agencies are meeting that were established through legislation. And then they are setting deadlines for all of these systems. So lots and lots of deadlines. We're going to try to get the latest we've seen. I know everybody who's been watching this as a concern be moving targets. Deadlines may slip. Looks like some have and some will. It looks like no, can't. And there are real implications to that. We'll, particularly with the Inflation Reduction, we'll pick that up just a little bit. Go ahead. Energy supply. So as Ariana mentioned, the focus of this briefing is energy supply. We refer to energy demand for the built environment either as energy demand or building facilities and manufacturing. That will be the subject of a separate briefing that we do. And we did a prior briefing on transportation. For those of you who missed that, that is available. It's recorded and we have a briefing memo around that. The energy sector, primary focus, and there's quite a bit of funding for different categories of end use. I'll look a little bit more specifically what they are and what is in them. But generically, we're looking at grid infrastructure. We're looking at large-scale transmission infrastructure, building code upgrades and adoption, and then training centers and educational programs for building auditors. But you will see provisions for capacity expansion in programs. And I know this has been a very big issue for both state and particularly local governments. So we'll try to, there are particular areas of opportunity for capacity expansion. Go ahead. Here are a couple of the big ones, and you'll see the program, the eligible actions, and then key dates with all the caveats we just mentioned. So grid hardening, which is modernization, resilience, distributed resources integration, workforce development, a lot of different opportunities there. And we would be interested in knowing if any of you are already looking at this as well as the others. And if you are pursuing there, I want to raise, because part of what we are trying to do things is it's some peer exchange and peer learning. As any of you are pursuing one part of this, I'm sure that there will be others who will be very knowing how you're going about doing it and how you actually decided to target that. So there are many different things that could be targeted in the grid hardening grants. Expected November 22. So, here we are. We really had been expecting a significant number of announcements tomorrow, November 15th, which will include some of the energy supply funding programs, but there will be buildings programs, transportation programs. There's quite a wide array that have been expected tomorrow. See what tomorrow brings, but certainly this is one that's expected soon. Demonstration, resilience, storage, and transmission. So I know there has been quite a bit of interest in storage. We'd love to hear whether anybody is pursuing storage through this particular program, needs any particular help there. Transmission facilitation. This is, a really kind of a big picture one in terms of large scale transmission plans, but this is a really critical enabling part of the mobilization of expanded renewable energy in some instances, and offshore wind, which we'll see in a little bit. And then smart grid grants, including upgrades and electric vehicle integration, pairs back to the transportation programs, where on the one hand, there's an effort to expand electric vehicle purchases fleet transition, et cetera. But on the other hand, to couple that with charging stations, but the supply of renewable energy to the extent possible to fuel that system. And one more near-term potential of 2021, an eye on that. Go ahead, Ariana. State Energy Program, it's been around a long time. You all, I'm sure, are well familiar with it, but we've more available here. And renewable energy, resilience, and then homegrown resources. Another round coming up, TBD, career skills training, training to underserved communities. So this is one that I think is likely to be of high interest to many of you because we've heard so much about the need for workforce in the underserved community environment. Energy Efficiency and Block Grant Program, another one that's been around a while, but it's been updated. And on renewable energy and renewable energy deployment. So this is a big renewable energy here. And demonstration projects, more energy storage. This one looks like it's going to be announced later in 2023. The other two of them are near term and one is okay, so we can do a timeout for each of these particular ones and let you look at some of the details a little bit more and then raise any questions you might have around this. I guess the other thing I'd love to do for each of these is to know if A, if you've got questions, B, if this is an area that you've already to focus on, and if you are, we'd love to know what you're doing there. So a lot of detail here. I don't think I will go through each and every element individually, but let me just stop on this, see if there are any particular questions or if anybody comments, including the current focus you have on this for grants. Anybody want to raise anything here?
So maybe, Tom, one thing while others may think, comments and questions that I want also to highlight. So some of these programs can be accessed only from by state governments. Other might have also open to local governments. Other will require coordination between them, and some of them cover both transmission, but also energy efficiency. So the demand side at the same time. So it's not really, unfortunately, they are not really so straightforward. So it's requires some thinking of what exactly you want to do, or you are trying to do, the scope of your program, and how this funding can help. And Julia, maybe you can also move to the next one, because we have 2 slides for this program because it's quite big. So look at this one, for example. You see there are also these like sub-grant eligible entities. So once a grant is received and then flow down, and it's different operators.
How many of the states here are pursuing this on the call? Any of you?
Gillian, go back if you don't mind. Okay, let's stay here. Thank you.
So I think, unless anybody has anything to offer, we can move on, but let me just double check. Is it Takeshi in California? Is this an area you guys are looking into by any chance?
Yeah, I know the California Public Utilities Commission, which is separate from CaliPA, my agency, is very aggressively pursuing grid hardening projects. And I'd be very surprised if they weren't pursuing federal funding, but actually I don't know the details on that because it's not my agency. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Just out of curiosity, do you know, as they do that, whether they are partnering with local governments or whether they're seeking other partners?
I'm sure they are through the regional, it's not necessarily county and city governments, but regional sub-bodies within the Public Utilities Commission that have a relationship with the local governments.
Got
But
it.
again,
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is not my agency, so I'm not an expert on those institutional matters.
And it's actually, I think, a good point to raise right now, because the funding out of the legislation is spread across different state agencies, different local agencies, and I think a lot of the representatives on this call and in this project are with environment or public works agencies, as opposed to, for instance, energy or transportation. But in many cases, in order to access these funds, you will need to be partnering with other agencies in some fashion, or simply facilitating or supporting or championing actions that they might take. I'm not hearing anything further, so maybe we could hop on to the next one.
Gillian, maybe go back a slide.
There we
Okay.
go.
Okay.
So this is states, tribes, collections of states, then public utility commissions. So it's maybe like the last one here. And I guess the same question goes back, whether anybody is aware that your state is pursuing this and there's anything here that is of interest for more discussion. I'd also just note that we had one deadline that was expected the end of the summer. I don't know whether that actually transpired or not, and another one that's expected any time now. Anybody have any thoughts around this set, the grid resilience demonstration grants? Okay. I think we can go on to the next slide. Transmission facilitation. Probably a little bit to the side. It's designed for transmission developers, but curious to know whether anybody has any thoughts around this particular program. I think the thing I would raise is the coordination between different program grants, so that transmission facilitation is being coupled with renewable energy expansion, for instance, or renewable energy storage. And so these are really part of a blended package of programs by different parties. And if that's the case, that requires high-level coordination to bring those together under some sort of a state, regional or local policy. And that'll vary state by state, but we certainly are seeing areas of interest in either using existing or putting forward state policy that will facilitate more coordination between the generation, storage, and transmission and distribution side of things in some coordinated fashion. Any call outs here? And Nick and Holly, feel free to make call outs if you'd like to on these slides as we go through, and Ariana yourself as well. Okay, let's go to the next one. Smart grid grants. Utilities are the audience here, but once again, raises the coordination issue, and a lot of funding here and potentially important. I don't know whether anybody has any thoughts around this area.
So maybe just one note. So I would say that this sector, the energy supply, the kind of opportunities we have are a bit slightly different than what we have seen in other sectors like transportation and buildings in terms of eligible parties. So this may also resonate less maybe for some localities compared to transportation or the building sector. It's just, the nature of the activities that are funding through this program.
Okay. Did we have a comment?
I can jump in here with an anecdote just to perhaps illustrate the importance of these grants to reliability. I'm not sure if everybody on the call is aware, but in August this year, California had a record-breaking heat wave that put very much stress on our grid and threatened to result in rolling blackouts. And it's only through demand response and control that we were able to prevent that from happening. So I would be very surprised indeed if the California Public Utilities Commission were not pursuing some of these grants to make sure that as our electricity supply is put under further strain by our electrification and decarbonization goals, especially in transportation and buildings, to make sure that those stresses are not repeated in the future.
Thank you for the call out, because this also raises a point of connection with a next briefing we will do on buildings and energy demand. But what we see as a tandem between energy and supply, using demand management mechanisms to be able to help manage the system as well as supply responses, pairing these things together. I think the other thing that's worth calling out is there is, in many cases, quite a bit of flexibility that can be exercised creatively by applicants for grant programs. And we're putting smart grid things in the energy supply box right here. But, as was just noted, this is an area that can be used for investment in demand side management as well.
I can offer City of Naperville. Like I said, we have our own electric utility. And I know that we are working on many of these things, if not all of them, at some level. But I don't know if we applied for the grant here. So I'll offer that these are all definitely things we're working on.
Well, it really would be of interest to know if you all are pursuing it and how you're going about doing it. Is it requiring the establishment of a partnership, or do you have an ongoing partnership? The reason I raise this is that in many cases, the applications are strongly encouraging partnership-based applications and deployment for this. So how you're handling that side of this definitely would be of interest. And I don't see on this one what the matching grant requirement is here. So I don't know whether it doesn't exist or whether it's simply not listed, but I'd also be curious to know how matching grants are being handled. Just, for local government, it's always a major issue.
Yeah, maybe one other thing for you all to know. I mean, we are, this is for many of you just the beginning of a conversation with us. So we are also happy to follow up with any of your colleagues working in areas that you are not directly involved, where you think they might need some help or would, like to engage. So we can definitely do some follow up and see, explore different opportunities.
Okay, maybe we can go ahead. State Energy Program. Again, this is an established program that's been plussed up and enhanced, and this is applicable to states, but can be used by states to work with local governments and other partners. And don't know whether anybody wants to give us any call outs here on this program and your interest or activity in this.
So because of its nature, this is one of those programs that's very broad. So you span from supply, demand, and again, it's a bit, what we were saying earlier about energy planning overall. This is definitely one of those programs that looks more broadly at the energy sector and the planning of for the energy sector.
Career skills. Let me check and see first off whether Nick or Holly or Adiana, you have any call outs on this one?
I think the only thing I would say, I mean, you can read here, you can read more in the memo, but so I think we definitely appreciate from this federal funding program the focus on workforce development, and that's also across the different sector how to build new skills. So many of these programs that have a workforce development or specific on career developments, career skill development, have also a very strong J40 requirement. So the idea is exactly like, create new workforce in those communities where it's mostly needed and they are disadvantaged. And you will see also in for the building sector next month, this is, building new workforce relating to the building sector is, it's very much present in each of the single program that goes from auditor, building code and so on.
Maybe it would be good to know whether any of the localities on the call are interested in or are already pursuing this. Now, this is not necessarily just internal capacity building, it's workforce, but I know there's a lot of local interest in community workforce development. Just curious to know whether anybody's focused on this or has any interest in pursuing it further. Okay, before we go to the next one, I think maybe what I would call out here is the question of whether this is something that could be done in parallel with another application so that we're getting workforce development concurrent with other investment. And I'm not sure the answer of that. I think we would need to look further into that. Go ahead to the next.
Yeah, I think you can move to the next, Julian. That's just, some additional details. Okay.
Okay, energy efficiency and conservation block grant. Again, a big one that's been around, but it's been plussed up. And really curious to know, who is working on this or thinks that that's the direction they're going to be going and what your thoughts are around it.
Yeah, I think that this is complementary to what we're working on as a city. And a lot of, and I apologize for not being able to bring more value to this portion of the conversation, but most of the funding for these initiatives are run through our electric utility, and they work with a contracted third party that focuses on trying to identify grants. So we have a consultant that helps us navigate some of these waters. So I'm not fully aware of what we have applied for in this space, but it's definitely along the lines of what we're working on.
Do you know, or anybody on our team, do we know what the matching funds requirements are here?
If it's not indicated here, it's because that information probably wasn't available at the time.
Okay.
We've always tried to include that if that's available in the documentation that's available. So
let me ask for those on the call who may in the past have been a part of this block grant program. And Takesha, I don't know whether you've been involved or not. Do you all recall whether it has a matching fund requirement and what it is?
Hi again. I'm just aware that California Energy Commission does provide guidelines and recommendations for local governments to apply for the block grant program, but I'm not aware of whether or not there's a matching grant requirement, although it would make sense that projects encouraged that an encouragement to do so would make projects appear more cost effective.
And it's probably typical then for the localities who are on this call to get access to this. One of the ways they get access to the program might be doing applications through a state agency, such as you are doing in California, as opposed to doing this just direct. Yeah. So there's a direct and then an indirect pathway here. Yeah, really helpful. Anything
Tom,
else?
I just looked into it, and I believe this one does not have a matching funds requirement, from what I can tell.
Is this a formula program? It's block and competitive. It looks like it might be a combination.
Yeah.
It's formula and competitive as well.
A combination. Okay. Good to know. Any other call outs on this? Okay, let's hop on. Energy storage demonstration pilot grant. And I would love to know who's working on this. And then Ben, is this one that you guys are focused on, do you think, as a part of the energy storage work you're doing?
Yeah, this one, I would be surprised if this is not something that we're working directly on, because that this is a stated goal of our electric utility, that we really want to pursue federal funds for a good size capacity battery energy storage operation. But I don't know for sure if we've applied for it.
And Holly and Nick or Ariana, do you know, in terms of, we did our transportation briefing and EV charging infrastructure, and then part of what came up was the linkage to the energy supply system and the deployment of renewables and the interest in getting storage in place to try to shift that energy supply mix over to renewables, which is a really long way of asking. Does anybody know whether this is being paired with charging infrastructure for that purpose? Or is there a separate program to try to provide for energy storage to support renewable energy for charging infrastructure?
Tom, I don't know, but I don't think, I mean, I think it could be, pair, like, oh, you just followed, one of the EV programs. I know I don't want to be mistaken, but I think, for example, the Navy plan has already, you can include storage within the Navy plan directly, or you just go right here.
All right. Any other call outs here? Okay. Next. Well, I think we may have covered this already, but anybody have any additional call outs on things that you are pursuing on the Infrastructure Act? And as Ariana indicated earlier, I know for many of us, we're just getting started here. Feel free to circle back with us if you take a further look at this and identify areas that may be of interest, or you discover that you're already engaged in some of these areas. We'd really love to know about that. It'd be really helpful to this dialogue. Ariana, Jillian, anything else we want to do here, or do we want to hop on?
I think we can move to IRA. Yeah, also in interest of time, we're looking.
Inflation Reduction Act.
Go ahead, Julia.
Similar objectives, but but we see some sharper focus on workforce diversity. Obviously, a driver for this is reducing inflation and energy cost. Just to call out on that, I don't think we have a slide here, but I don't know whether it was 2 or 3 months ago, the Bureau of Labor Statistics issued an assessment of the role that different drivers in the United States are contributing to inflation. And it's shifted a little bit since then. Actually, energy costs have come down. But at that time, energy costs were by, I think, a factor of 5, influencing the rise in inflation in the United States in comparison to everything else. So a really, really critical national economic security variable here, and has huge implications for climate change as well. Being able to bring those energy costs down as we shift to more efficient and renewable sources is very critical. So a lot of the funding here is designed to facilitate that, as well as economic recovery. But we will see here also the emphasis on EJ40 and then low and moderate income in particular. So we'll pick that up as we go through. The Infrastructure Act, if I've got my numbers right, in total is 1.2 trillion. Now that's spread across a lot of different things. Inflation Reduction Act has in it, for climate change related programs, 369 billion. This is a lot of money. If you compare that, for instance, to the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act back in 10, 12 years ago, that this is orders of magnitude greater than that. So really the scale of this is pretty amazing. But it has to be said also, when you run the numbers on the amount of money that is needed to bring climate change mitigation policies and programs to scale at the state and local level, these are large numbers. So it's, from that standpoint, not a surprise at all to see things at this scale. The timing of this is aggressive, and that's why we're all talking together today. The need to be able to be proactive in pursuing these funds so they get deployed on schedule and they're not lost. So about 2/3 of this is federal tax credits, and covering a variety of key things here, some of which dovetail with what we just talked about: production of clean energy, renewable energy technology, climate change, including carbon sequestration, renewable fuels, and clean energy manufacturing. And the tax credits are designed to support households and businesses. We'll see this in a minute. The wrinkle here is what we call direct pay, which is now, for some of these tax credits, the ability of non-taxable entities to pursue them: cities, counties, community-based organizations, churches, et cetera. And we're right in the middle now of expecting guidelines from Treasury on these. And we'll turn to that in a minute to see what we've learned lately. Go ahead. Okay, tax credits and direct pay. So production investment tax credits, other incentives. Some of these have strings attached that are a little bit in the weeds. The investment tax credit, I think, has a 10% bonus for either J40 or low and moderate income, but we see bonus situations in some of these. We'll give you a list of the tax credits that have the ones that are eligible for direct pay in a minute. We also see grants and loans, technical assistance, siting, financial assistance. And I mean, this is also worth calling out a little bit of, there's competition here, and early bird gets the worm. I looked at the loan office numbers at DOE the other day, and I'm off the top of my head recalling that maybe Inflation Reduction Act provides something like 11 billion in new loan capacity, but that's against 81 billion in loan applications. So the reality, and I may have gotten my numbers wrong, but the takeaway was there is a really high demand for loans. And this program is supporting a fair chunk of that, but there is so much demand that it just requires immediate action to compete for the loan funds. Go ahead. Okay, environmental justice, disadvantaged communities, J40, again, a 10% investment tax credit. Workforce diversity, we have domestic content requirements. Those are written out per se for different areas, some of which those guidelines have already been issued. Others, we will see more about it. We see special environmental justice projects, 60 billion, and then for them, we'll see them in a minute. And then we'll talk about the environmental and climate justice block grants. We will also talk about the green banking funds in a minute that have some requirements with them as well. Go ahead. Okay. So we've got programs on the left column, actions they support, and then key dates. All the key dates are to be issued soon. We had understood that for the tax credits, we were going to be seeing guidelines issued in October. That does not appear to have happened, although we saw some public comment. So I think that's definitely something we'll keep our eyes on. And if you go through these, there is a fair amount of flexibility here, but in particular to support climate action planning. And one thing that y'all may be aware of is that in the infrastructure law, the way it was structured is that for a lot of it, climate change mitigation is encouraged but not required. So when we went through the transportation briefing, it included existing programs, surface transportation programs, for instance, that could be used under new guidelines in a more creative fashion to support carbon reduction. However, it is not required. And I just want to call this out because it's a big difference between the two bills. If you look at the analysis at large of the Infrastructure Act and ask the question, what will this do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the United States? And the answer is, it depends. If the funds are used for purely conventional purposes, that actually increases greenhouse gas emissions. If they are used for alternative approaches that are low carbon, then it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions significantly. But it's really critical that states and localities work hard on how that money is spent if they are concerned about greenhouse gas emissions. The incentives and programs in the Inflation Reduction Act are structured specifically to support climate change mitigation. And you see several of them, and these have been of real interest to localities and states in prior conversations because of that. And so if you are interested in specifically tackling climate change issues, there are a number here that are directly applicable. The very first one is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. And this is planning and implementation. I think the perspective in the legislation is every state and locality should have a comprehensive climate action plan and the wherewithal to implement it. And this is a grant program designed to facilitate that. We see that then at the sector level, low emissions electricity program, energy infrastructure, transmission facility siting, offshore, major issue for many states, and rural electric cooperatives as well. And to underscore that this legislation, as well as the infrastructure legislation, is clearly focused on rural communities as well as urban. So there's a lot of opportunity here that's really teed up to directly address climate change issues. Go ahead. So I'm going to let Holly or Nick give us the call outs on this if you have any. We've got tax credits, the activities, and then the tax credit and direct pay. And it looks like all of these have eligibility for both. But Holly, Nick, anything you would call out for us on the tax credit side here?
I think like we've been saying, we're still waiting for the guidance, especially for the direct pay aspect of that. I believe their comment period ends December 3rd. So hopefully we'll find out more soon after that.
I don't think I have any other specific call outs. I haven't been looking too closely into these recently, so.
Okay. Well, we can circle back to this, but why don't we hop on? Okay, so maybe we'll do call outs here for the particular programs. Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program through EPA, states, localities, governmental entities, and the NOFO is expected, let's see, 9 months after IRA, which places us when, May, June, something like that? Nick, do you know off the top?
No, I'll have to do some counting in my head real quick.
Would be real interested to know for folks on the call here whether you have already looked at this program. If you have, whether you've made plans. If you haven't, is this something you need help looking into?
It should be around May or June.
Yeah, I think that I don't believe that we have been looking closely into pursuing this grant program, but I think that it would be of value to us. And I think we could use a little help figuring out exactly how to pair this with our many infrastructure activities and how we're planning for that. So definitely welcome circling back once we have more guidance on all this IRA stuff.
Yeah, happy to do that. So one of the things that we do specialize in at CCS is comprehensive climate action planning and implementation, and this is designed specifically for that purpose. If you look closely here, what you will see is, I think, 2, if not 3 steps. The first, which appears 9 months from enactment, is funding for planning, but you'll note that implementation funding follows. And so I think the intent here was to enable the development of implementation-driven climate action plans, comprehensive plans that would identify all the specific policies and measures and the specific programmatic mechanisms needed for implementation, and then put out another funding opportunity for states and localities to obtain the funding to implement the programs that come out of that planning process. And obviously the big difficulty with planning for so long has been identifying the sources of funds that are needed to implement the plans. That's why so many of them were not implemented. This is a program here that lets you fix that problem by stitching together the implementation funds with an implementation-driven, comprehensive plan. It's a great opportunity. Again, we'd be delighted to help anybody who's interested in this look into it a little bit further. The EPA will be interested in knowing price points. How much do you need for the planning process? How might that be structured? How long will it take? What will the outcomes be, et cetera? And those are all areas where we could provide some assistance. Anything else on this anybody'd like to call out? And I think maybe I'm going to, before we move on, I'm going to turn back to Takeshi and ask you if you know whether you're at Cal EPA, whether you are planning on pursuing this to supplement the ongoing efforts that you all have on planning. You've been certainly at it for a while, but do you know this is one that you guys are looking at for that purpose?
Yeah, it seems like it would be very much relevant to Cal Recycle, which is underneath Cal EPA, and their work on methane mitigation related to food waste and landfill waste. But no, I'm not up to date on their dialogues on this particular component of the grant of the IRA.
Okay, and Nick and Holly, do you know whether this grant program includes support for staff capacity so that states and localities in particular would be able to hire people internally for the planning process or even hire consultants?
I do not know.
Yeah, I
Nick.
don't remember seeing anything about capacity building.
Well, this is it's a lot of work, right? And going back to, I think Julia mentioned at the very beginning, this is, one of the greatest concerns we've heard from many localities is just not having available capacity to take advantage of funds. And so this is one area where planning support is being provided, but you have to have the planners to do it. And I'm going to guess that this does have provisions for staff expansion in it, but it'd be worth looking into. And so in Prince William County, for instance, this might be a great opportunity because you guys will be able to obtain funding to put in place the necessary capacity and the process for a climate action plan for the county. Okay, well, maybe we can move on. Any call outs here?
So maybe just a general note, I'm sorry, Nick, and then we need to keep in mind that, there is because we are waiting for guidance, many details are not clear, defined yet. So yeah, we also have many questions that try to figure it out. And I feel like, we need to be a bit more patient. Nick, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to call out in this one, there is funding for, technical assistance, capacity building there. So that might be a good one to focus on.
Okay. Anything else on this? We might hop on to the next one. Loan Program Office. Any call outs here? This is the one I mentioned where they're oversubscribed with loans. So now's the time. Okay, go ahead. Anything to call out on this? Okay. Next. So I think, as everybody knows here, siting is one of the bottlenecks for implementation of renewable energy expansion. And this is designed to try to accelerate that process. Any call outs here by anybody? Okay, we can move on. Offshore wind, and not sure how many offshore wind states and localities we have here. How many states? I don't know if we have anybody at all on that's in offshore, although in California, Takeshi, I'm not sure whether this applies to you all or not. Any call outs on this one?
It does indeed apply to California. But as far as I'm aware, we're still in a bit of a Wild West situation where we have big plans, but the near term will very much be the articulation of those plans. And yeah, they're not concrete yet, as far as I'm aware.
I think the mid-Atlantic states are in the Wild East. So they are in the same boat where, you know, they've got to clear up the programmatic and policy side of this, and the clock's ticking, so that has to happen soon. And then there's the siting and federal money going out to try to clear up siting and eligibility, but also figuring out what the programmatic mechanism, and will there be offshore corridors? If there are offshore corridors, you know, under whose ownership, you know, and, you know, we're working a bit in the state of Maryland. The question is whether the whole system is going to be governed by the state or not. And all the different states up and down the East Coast are trying to figure out what that model looks like. This funding is designed, I think, to support those planning and assessment processes to try to get in gear to enable more offshore wind. And also that would lead to and be coupled with transmission upgrades and also energy storage, the enabling actions that are required to bring more electricity from offshore onto the grid without disrupting stability or affordability. And in the East, you know, in the Mid-Atlantic region, we've got PJM and then per se requirements for grid stability and affordability rates that have to be met as a part of that. So all that kind of factors in, and this is support to try to help iron all that out. And I'm not sure how big a slice of the pie this is in California, but just to call out an East Coast state, if you look at Maryland's looking at a 100% renewable portfolio standard by 2040. There's actually some interest in accelerating that to 2035. Our group is actually in the middle of a fairly intensive assessment around that will be available next year. But the early reading is the amount of offshore wind that, well, offshore wind is going to play a very critical role in whether or not the state can meet a 100% renewable portfolio standard. So the stakes are really quite high for this. Okay.
I know that California will be quite a significant portion of this 10 gigawatt goal, given how big a portion of the lower 48's coastline California makes up.
Yeah.
I believe it's somewhere between a 2 to 5 gigawatt ambition we have in California. So that's huge, and there will certainly be a great deal of need for planning, modeling, and development of interregional transmission as this process goes forward. But I think it's only been a month or two since there was action on the federal government. Sorry, I don't know the details on licensing for offshore sites that the California government is now responding to. So that's the current state of development. But yeah, it's going to be quite a lot of work on our part.
And it'll result in many interesting conversations about where that power comes on shore and how you get those electrons from out there to their endpoints. Okay, next. Rural electric cooperatives. Anybody have call outs here?
So maybe we move on because I'm just looking at the time now.
Yeah, I agree.
Just want to, yeah. I mean,
so the
yeah.
Green Bank, 27 billion in total. A $7 billion portion of that goes through from EPA to state designated entities. The remainder will be determined, but the legislation was structured in anticipation that that would go through a national green bank for a combination of large infrastructure projects and then money that would go to state and local intermediaries. This is in the middle of a comment period right now by EPA, and the funds, once they reach intermediaries, then can be used by the intermediaries to support a variety of things in a variety of ways. So there's a heck of a lot of flexibility built into this program potentially, but it does require capacity by an intermediary to do this. Some states have a state green bank and others do not. In some cases, we have local or regional green banks that also can play a role, but there are community development finance institutions and others that potentially can play a role here. So I think a lot of the organizational side of this is in the middle of being sorted out by EPA. Some of you may be in the midst of those conversations already because it's in comment period. I know the U.S. Sustainable Directors Network has been very actively involved on behalf of counties. And Takeshi, I don't know whether you know what's going on in California on this. I would be interested in knowing if you all are set up to have a state green bank that will be able to play this role.
I'm sorry, this is just my personal expertise or lack thereof on display, but I'm just not aware.
Okay, all right. Well, we've had some conversations around that. We'll stick with it and circle back. I know some of the folks who've been participating here have been interested in getting support around the Green Bank Fund. Let me just call out the timing issue here. So on the $7 billion piece, which may go out in multiple chunks, but the first chunk by law is supposed to be out in the middle of February. And when you work the clock backwards from the comment period, which is underway now and ends, I guess, December 5 or something, and then the period of time required to produce a solicitation, have folks respond to it, and then act on it in terms of awards. The net of it is this is going to move very quickly. And so now is absolutely the time, if you are interested, to be talking about how to go about doing that. I think in a lot of cases, local governments are looking at partnering with states, and states are even looking at partnering with each other on this. So now's the time to be looking into this, and we'd be happy to help if you need any on this. Go ahead.
Yeah, just go next one, Jillian.
Ariana, maybe I'll turn this back to you.
Yeah, I think, and with this one, maybe we can also move to next step. Yeah, definitely we would love to hear from any one of you if based on this, you feel there is any area where you might benefit of some assistance or you would like to follow up again. Please consider this open to your colleagues as well, at their department, at their agencies, where you might think they might benefit. And also, please keep in mind that this is, I mean, this briefing is focused on energy supply, but the project covers also transportation and the building sector. So you can think a bit broader here. And I'm just saying that because many of you are really new to this. So we, as follow-up, yeah, any of your jurisdiction has interest in hearing more about the project and see, again, if you can benefit from our in-kind assistance, feel free to reach out to Jillian. We will be happy to schedule one-on-one conversation just to go into more details on what you are looking for, just answer some of the questions and expand on what we covered today, or maybe what we covered in the previous briefing as well, and then take from there and see if you have any interest. But again, if you have any additional thoughts you would like to share now in terms of type of assistance you're looking for, feel free to do that. And yeah, Jillian just added her email in the chat. So in terms of, again, your desire to follow up or just share information with your colleague, we will be happy to do a one call just to get me a bit more specific. And I think, next briefing in December on the building sector. I can't recall right now the date, but Gillian will send you a reminder all the related information. But maybe let me stop here, see if there is anything else anyone from the team would like to add, and most importantly, if there is anything from all of you that you would like to share, questions, comments, follow up, really anything. Keep also in mind the 1-1 call, it's not any like, commitment, formal commitment from your side. It's really just open it's like another opportunity for you to get a more targeted discussion around the needs of your jurisdiction. And bring also on the call other people from your jurisdiction that might be interested.
I'll just say thank you to you and the team for putting this together and all of the summarized information. Obviously, there's still a lot of pending, once we hear what the rules are and the mechanisms and stuff like that. But I will definitely, once we get the slides from Jillian, I'll look forward to sharing with my counterparts at our electric utility to see how we can expand what we're looking at. And we'll follow up for sure if there's an opportunity to dig deeper with you on any of these items.
Wonderful.
I'd also like to echo that compliment and gratitude, just because it's so helpful to have this centralized single point of analysis, especially for a large, sprawling administration like the state of California, where so many different agencies each are responsible for their own piece of the pie. So that's why I, for example, am not too educated on what the California Department of Food and Agriculture, for example, is doing with their IRA responsibilities. So yeah, thank you so much for putting this all in one place. It really, really helps improve governance.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining, your contribution. And we hope this was helpful, in a way or the other to your jurisdiction. Again, feel free to reach out, no commitment, just it's really like, we really would like to help and just do some additional brainstorming and see what might be most helpful for you. Gillian, I don't know if I forgot anything to close.
No, that sounds great. Thank you all for running this meeting and giving us all of the important information. I'll follow up with all of the participants along with a few others that registered and are unfortunately not able to make it, and we'll be in contact soon.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Great.
Have a
Thanks,
wonderful
guys.
Thank you.
We'll see you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.